I found the letter late that evening, folded neatly on my pillow, my name written in careful, deliberate handwriting. For a moment, I thought it was from my husband. It had been weeks since he'd spoken to me with any warmth, and part of me foolishly hoped it was a small gesture of reconciliation. The paper was thick, the ink dark, almost hesitant. I held it between my fingers, feeling an unexpected unease. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. My husband hadn't come home yet, another late meeting. I'd stopped asking questions, tired of half-truths and practiced excuses. Silence had replaced affection between us. The laughter we once shared now lived only in memory, fading with every unanswered call and every night he turned his back to me. But it wasn't his handwriting. The letters were smaller, neater, familiar in a different way. My stomach tightened as realization dawned. It was Ethan's. Ethan, my stepson, had always been gentle but reserved. When I married his father 2 years ago, he was 17, polite, distant, and clearly uncomfortable with my presence. I never blamed him. Losing his mother had left a wound that time refused to heal. I didn't try to replace her. I only wanted to be someone he could trust. Slowly, things had improved. He'd started talking to me more, smiling occasionally at my jokes, even helping me in the kitchen sometimes. There was a quiet bond forming between us, delicate, like glass. But lately, something had shifted. He'd grown quieter again, eyes avoiding mine, leaving rooms when I entered. I'd assumed it was teenage moodiness, or perhaps tension from his father's growing indifference. I didn't press him. I thought giving space was kindness. Now, staring at that letter, I felt a strange chill, as if the air itself had thickened with something unspoken. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. For a long time, I didn't open it. My mind wandered instead, to the early months of my marriage. The way Ethan's father had held my hand in public, proud to have found love again. The way Ethan had silently watched us from a distance, unsure how to belong to this newly formed family. I remembered how I'd left small notes for him on exam days, little words of encouragement, and how he'd once left a thank you card on my desk. That small gesture had felt like a victory. Maybe this letter was something similar, I told myself. Maybe he was thanking me again. Maybe it was harmless. But that uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. My instincts whispered otherwise. I opened it. The first line was ordinary enough. I hope you're not mad that I wrote this. I smiled faintly, imagining him nervously writing those words. But as my eyes moved down, the words began to change shape, carrying a weight I wasn't ready for. I don't know how to say this out loud, it continued. And maybe I shouldn't say it at all, but I can't keep pretending. My hands froze. The air seemed to vanish from the room. My pulse quickened. I read the next line again, certain I'd misunderstood it. He wrote about how he felt safe when I was around, how my kindness made him feel seen, how he looked forward to hearing my voice in the morning. I wanted to believe it was an innocent kind of affection, but the tone, God, the tone, was something else. There was longing in his words, confusion, guilt, but also something heartbreakingly sincere. My chest tightened as I continued reading. He said he knew it was wrong, that he hated himself for thinking about me the way he did, but he couldn't stop it. He wrote that I made the house feel alive again, that when his father ignored me, he wanted to say something but didn't know how. You deserve to be loved properly, he wrote. And I wish it wasn't him who failed to do it. I dropped the paper for a moment, pressing my palms against my eyes. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. I didn't know what to feel. Disbelief, fear, pity, all tangled inside me. The words didn't sound like a teenager's fantasy. They sounded like the confession of someone who'd been hurting too long, someone reaching for warmth in the wrong direction. I picked the letter up again, rereading each sentence, hoping that somehow I had misread the tone. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't about me, it was about absence, his father's emotional absence, the hollow quiet that filled the house, the lack of affection that left two people lost in different ways. One turned cold. The other confused love with care. Tears blurred my vision as I reached the end of the page. The final lines were written shakily, the ink smudged as if by tears. "I know it's wrong to feel this way," he wrote, "but I don't know how to stop. I'm sorry if this ruins everything. I just needed you to know." I sat still for what felt like hours, staring at the letter. Every memory replayed in fragments: the nights he lingered at the kitchen table, the shy smiles, the small compliments I brushed off as politeness. Each one now felt like a warning I hadn't seen. A soft storm building in silence. I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at what had created this. My husband's betrayal had left this house emotionally starved, and we were both suffering from it in different ways. Ethan had mistaken care for affection, attention for intimacy. And I had been too wrapped up in my own heartbreak to notice the signs. The letter lay open beside me, its words cutting through every layer of denial I had built over the past year. My life, my marriage, this family I thought I was healing, all of it suddenly felt fragile, built on a foundation of loneliness. Outside, a car door slammed. My husband was home. I quickly folded the letter, slipping it under my pillow, my hands shaking. I couldn't face him. Not tonight. Not with this letter still burning in my chest. He entered the room, muttered something about dinner, and disappeared into the shower. His indifference was almost a relief. I sat there, silent, listening to the water run, wondering how many secrets this house could hold before it finally broke apart. When he turned off the light and lay beside me, I stared into the dark, feeling the letter under my pillow like a weight pressing against my heart. I wanted to believe this was just a mistake, a misunderstanding, a young man's confusion. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the reflection of everything broken between us, written by the one person I never expected to hurt me. I closed my eyes, praying for sleep, but the words echoed relentlessly in my mind. "I just needed you to know." And with that, everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and family began to crumble. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's handwriting, his words curling in my mind like smoke that refused to fade. By morning, I felt hollow, drained, fragile, and uncertain about what to do. I went through the motions of my routine as if on autopilot, pouring coffee, setting the table, pretending everything was fine. But nothing was fine. The letter had changed everything. When Ethan came into the kitchen, his eyes briefly met mine before darting away. He looked nervous, like someone waiting for a verdict. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice felt trapped behind the lump in my throat. He mumbled a good morning and sat down, his fingers drumming against the table. I noticed how tense he was, how carefully he avoided looking at me. The silence between us was suffocating. I kept replaying the letter in my head, trying to decide whether to confront him. But what would I even say? "I read your confession, and I forgive you." That sounded cruel and condescending. He was young, lost, confused. Maybe this was just a moment of weakness. Yet the maturity of his words haunted me. It wasn't a child's fantasy. It was grief, loneliness, and misplaced affection shaped into confession. As he left for college, he paused at the door. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded too quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He gave a faint nod and walked away. The moment the door closed, I exhaled shakily, realizing I'd been holding my breath. All day, my mind wrestled with guilt and confusion. I wasn't angry at him, I couldn't be. He hadn't done anything beyond writing the truth he was struggling with. But I was angry at myself for being blind to his pain. Angry at my husband for creating the emptiness that had driven both of us into such emotional ruin. That evening, when my husband came home, he didn't even notice my distraction. He dropped his briefcase, grabbed a beer, and collapsed onto the couch without a word. I watched him from the kitchen, the man I'd once loved, now just a stranger sharing my last name. The silence between us had become so normal it no longer even hurt. But now, after the letter, that silence felt dangerous. It had consequences. Later that night, I sat on the floor beside the bed and unfolded the letter again. I read it slowly, line by line, until I could recite it from memory. I wondered how long he'd been carrying those feelings. When had they begun? Was it that night we stayed up talking about his mother, when he cried for the first time and I comforted him? Or maybe when I praised him for his art, telling him his drawings had emotion in them, something his father never noticed. Had those words meant more to him than I realized? Each thought was a knife twisting deeper into my conscience. I had been trying to nurture, not invite affection. But how do you control what another person feels when all you've ever given them is kindness? The next few days blurred together. Ethan avoided me, staying out late, barely speaking at meals. His behavior broke my heart because it confirmed what I feared. He regretted the letter. Maybe he thought I hated him now. Maybe he was ashamed. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront him. I didn't want to make him relive that humiliation. My husband remained oblivious, preoccupied with whatever kept him busy lately. I'd long stopped asking where he went after work. But the signs were undeniable. The scent of unfamiliar perfume, late-night texts he hid behind a turned screen, the sudden defensiveness whenever I walked into the room. Once upon a time, his lies would have shattered me. Now, they barely stung. Maybe because my heart had already been broken by a letter that wasn't even meant to deceive. A week later, I found Ethan in the backyard, sitting on the steps, staring into nothing. The sky was grey, heavy with rain. He looked so young, so lost. I hesitated before stepping outside. He heard me and straightened quickly, his expression guarded. "Hey," he said softly, his voice tight. I nodded. "Hey." We stood there in silence for a long time, neither knowing how to begin. Finally, I spoke. "I got your letter." His face drained of color. "I'm sorry," he whispered instantly. "I shouldn't have, I didn't mean to make things weird. I don't know. I wasn't thinking." I shook my head. "You were thinking. Too much, maybe. But you were honest." He looked at me then, eyes wide and filled with tears he tried to hide. "I didn't want you to think I'm some kind of freak. You're the only one who's ever actually cared." His voice cracked on the last word, and it broke something inside me. I wanted to comfort him, but every instinct told me not to. "Ethan," I said gently, "what you're feeling isn't wrong because you're evil or broken. It's wrong because it comes from pain. You're hurting, and your heart's trying to find safety where it can. That's not love. It's loneliness." He wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. "I know," he said, barely above a whisper. "I just didn't know what to do with it." "I know," I said softly. "And I'm not angry. But we need to move forward. You need to find someone your own age, someone who can give you what you deserve. I'm not that person, Ethan. I never can be." He nodded, looking down, and for a long time neither of us spoke. The rain began to fall, thin and cold. I stepped back toward the door. "You don't need to feel ashamed," I said quietly before leaving him there, his head bowed, the sound of rain filling the silence we couldn't bear to break. That night, I cried for him, for the boy who'd lost his mother, for the man who'd lost his wife, and for the woman trapped between their wounds. My marriage had turned into a ghost of itself, and now my stepson's letter had forced me to see the depth of the damage that silence and neglect could cause. I didn't tell my husband about the letter. What good would it have done? He wouldn't understand. He'd barely even look at his son, let alone care about his feelings. I started realizing that this house wasn't a home anymore. It was a graveyard of unspoken things, betrayal, guilt, longing, and silence, all rotting under one roof. A few nights later, I found myself standing by Ethan's door, tempted to knock, to tell him that it was okay, that would be all right. But I didn't. Some boundaries, once crossed, can never be rebuilt. And maybe distance was the only way either of us could heal. When I went to bed that night, the letter was still tucked in my drawer, folded perfectly, its edges slightly worn from being opened too many times. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was a wound, yes, but it was also a mirror, a reflection of everything I had lost without even realizing it. I lay awake again, staring into the dark, my husband asleep beside me, the weight of two betrayals pressing down on my chest. One was born of desire, the other of neglect. Both had left scars I knew would never fade. And as I listened to the steady rhythm of my husband's breathing, I realized the cruel truth. Sometimes, the deepest infidelity isn't physical at all, it's emotional, invisible, and it happens long before anyone ever notices. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere in the house thickened with unspoken tension. Ethan and I barely crossed paths anymore. When we did, our interactions were polite, brief, and painfully formal. He was trying to move on, I could tell. He spent more time out of the house, came home late, avoided eye contact. I told myself that was good, that distance would help both of us heal, but the silence hurt in its own way. My husband, meanwhile, was becoming more distant by the day. He'd grown careless in hiding his lies. His phone was always face down, his cologne replaced by a scent I didn't recognize, one far too floral to belong to him. Sometimes, when he came home, I could smell another woman's perfume lingering on his clothes, faint but undeniable. I no longer asked questions. I didn't have the strength to hear his denials. The truth had already begun to rot in the air between us. One evening, as I was folding laundry, I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. 2 nights, 1 room, paid in cash. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling, then quietly placed it on the dresser. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I lay beside him, pretending to sleep, while he scrolled through his phone with a small smile on his lips, the same smile he hadn't given me in months. It's strange how betrayal changes you. At first, it breaks you, then it numbs you. After a while, you stop waiting for truth and start collecting silence as proof. Every unanswered question becomes an answer in itself. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Tired eyes, hollow cheeks, a quiet ache that no amount of sleep could erase. I wasn't angry anymore. I was empty. Later that evening, I found Ethan sitting in the living room, sketching in his notebook. His hair had grown longer, and he looked older somehow, more guarded. When he noticed me, he hesitated, then quietly said, "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean to make things hard for you." I wanted to tell him he hadn't ruined anything, that things were already broken long before his letter, but the words stuck in my throat. I just nodded and said, "It's okay, Ethan. You don't have to keep apologizing." He gave a small, sad smile. "I'm trying to move on. I'm seeing someone now. She's nice." The relief that washed over me was mixed with something else, grief, maybe. Not for him, but for everything that could have been different if our lives hadn't collided in pain. "I'm glad," I said softly. "You deserve someone good." That night, as I was cleaning the kitchen, my husband came home late again. He was humming, actually humming, as he poured himself a drink. The sound was almost surreal. "You're in a good mood," I said quietly. He glanced at me, smirking. "Just had a long day. Trying to unwind." I studied him for a moment. His shirt collar was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, the faint trace of lipstick near his jawline. I don't know what came over me, but something inside finally cracked. "Who is she?" I asked. He froze, glass halfway to his lips. "What are you talking about?" "Don't insult me," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was calm, too calm. The perfume, the receipts, the way you can't even look me in the eye anymore. "I know, Daniel." For a long time, he said nothing. Then he sighed and set his drink down. "You're imagining things," he muttered, turning toward the hallway. I stepped in front of him. "No. You don't get to walk away this time." His eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe irritation. "Fine," he snapped. "You want the truth. There's someone. It just happened. You and I haven't been right for a while." The words sliced through me, but I didn't cry. I'd spent too many nights grieving a man who had left long before this moment. I just nodded slowly. "You're right," I said quietly. "We haven't been right. But instead of fixing it, you found someone else to distract you from your own failure." He scoffed. "Oh, come on. Don't act like you're innocent. You think I haven't noticed how close you and Ethan have gotten?" His words struck like a slap. I felt my blood run cold. "Don't you dare," I whispered. He leaned closer, his tone sharp and bitter. "You think I didn't see the looks? The little moments? Don't pretend you're some saint in all this." I stepped back, disgusted. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You neglected your son just like you neglected me. The only difference is, I tried to help him, and you looked the other way. He stared at me for a long time, jaw clenched. Maybe we're both guilty then, he said finally, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Just in different ways. And with that, he walked past me, leaving me standing there, shaking, furious, heartbroken all over again. After he went to bed, I sat alone in the dark living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The letter, the affair, the lies, they all blurred into one sickening truth. This family had been dying slowly, and we'd all played a part in its decay. Ethan's letter had been a symptom, not the disease. He was starved for affection, I for honesty, and his father for ego. Each of us reaching for something we couldn't name, hurting each other without meaning to. The clock ticked quietly, steady and cruel. I thought about leaving that night, packing a bag, disappearing without explanation. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to understand what closure even looked like. The next morning, the house was silent. My husband had already left for work. Ethan's door was closed. I stood in the hallway, staring at both spaces, one representing betrayal, the other confusion, and realized I didn't belong in either anymore. That day, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't looking for revenge or pity. I just wanted peace. When I got home that evening, Ethan was gone, but he'd left a note on the counter. Thank you for everything. I'm staying with a friend for a while. Please don't worry about me. I sat at the table, holding the note, feeling both relieved and broken. He was leaving, my husband was already half gone, and I was finally ready to stop pretending. That night, I didn't cry. For the first time, I felt something closer to freedom than sadness. The truth was ugly, yes, but it was also honest. And honesty, I realized, was the first step toward healing. As I climbed into bed, I looked at the empty space beside me and whispered to myself, it's over. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. Not until I faced what came after endings, the part where you rebuild from the ruins. The house felt different after Ethan left. Quieter, emptier, but also strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, I could hear myself think. There were no half-hearted conversations, no footsteps pacing through hallways filled with tension. Just silence, clean, heavy, and honest. My husband didn't ask where Ethan had gone. He didn't even mention him. That, more than anything, told me what kind of man he truly was. A father who could pretend his son didn't exist simply because facing him meant facing his own failures. I stopped expecting compassion from him long ago, but seeing that indifference broke the last fragile piece of respect I had left for him. I started sleeping in the guest room. No arguments, no explanations. We barely spoke beyond routine exchanges, bills, groceries, the kind of empty dialogue shared by people who used to know each other. I was still there physically, but in every real way, I had already left. In those weeks of silence, I began to write again. Not letters to anyone else, just to myself. I filled page after page with thoughts I'd buried for years. I wrote about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love could fix anything. I wrote about the man I thought I married, and the boy who mistook kindness for love because no one had taught him the difference. Writing became my confession, my therapy, my release. One night, after another quiet dinner where my husband barely looked up from his phone, I placed an envelope on the table in front of him. "What's this?" he asked without interest. "My goodbye," I said simply. He looked up, frowning as if I'd said something ridiculous. "You're leaving." "I already left," I replied. "You just didn't notice." He scoffed, muttering something about me being dramatic, but I didn't argue. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. I had spent too much of myself trying to hold together something that had stopped existing long ago. I didn't need his understanding or guilt. I only needed to walk away with my dignity intact. I moved out 2 days later. A small apartment on the edge of town became my sanctuary. The first night there, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and realized how light I felt. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly, in the form of deep breaths, empty rooms, and the sound of your own voice saying, "I survived." A month passed before I heard from Ethan again. It was another letter. The envelope was thinner this time, his handwriting steadier. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unsure what to expect. He wrote that he'd started therapy, that he was learning how grief and loneliness can twist emotions into something they're not. He said he finally understood that his feelings for me had been born from emptiness, not love, that he had confused comfort with connection. He thanked me for not shaming him, for seeing his pain instead of judging it. Then he wrote something that made me cry. "You were the first person who ever made me feel safe. That's what I'll always remember. You don't owe me forgiveness because you never wronged me. But I needed you to know I'm okay now." I folded the letter and held it to my chest. It was the closure I didn't realize I'd been waiting for, not just from him, but from everything. I wrote him back the same night, telling him I was proud of him, that healing takes courage, and that he should never apologize for being human. After sending it, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel haunted by the past. The house, the marriage, the heartbreak, they had all been lessons. Painful, necessary lessons that taught me what love isn't. Love isn't obligation. It isn't staying silent to keep the peace. It isn't waiting for someone to choose you when they've already turned away. And it definitely isn't something you beg to keep. Weeks later, my divorce papers arrived. I signed them without hesitation. No tears, no regrets. Just calm acceptance. My husband didn't fight it. Maybe he was relieved too. Two broken people finally freeing each other from a story that had run its course. Afterward, I returned to the house one last time to collect a few forgotten things. The rooms looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of warmth, stripped of memory. On the nightstand in my old bedroom, I found Ethan's first letter, the one that had started it all. I picked it up, read a few lines, and for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt gratitude. That letter had shattered me once, but now it felt like a mirror, showing me the version of myself that had been asleep for too long. The woman who had settled for less, who mistook endurance for strength, who forgot that love should never come at the cost of her own peace. I placed both of Ethan's letters in a small box and took them with me. Not as reminders of heartbreak, but as symbols of truth. They represented everything I'd survived: betrayal, confusion, guilt, and finally, forgiveness. Months passed, and life slowly began to take shape again. I started teaching art classes at a small community center. It felt good to create again, to connect with people without fear or pretense. My laughter returned, hesitant at first, then real. Sometimes, I think about Ethan. Not with regret, but with hope. I imagine him somewhere new, studying, building a life untouched by the shadows of our shared past. And I think about his father too, not with bitterness, but with understanding. Some people never learn how to love, they only learn how to need. Every so often, I open my journal and write letters I'll never send, to the girl I used to be, to the man who broke me, to the boy who taught me compassion through his own confusion. I write until my heart feels lighter. And then, I close the notebook and whisper to myself, "You're free." Because I am. Free from the ache of pretending. Free from the burden of holding together what was never whole. Free from mistaking loyalty for love. Sometimes I still dream of that house, the quiet halls, the ticking clock, the folded letter on the pillow that changed everything. But in those dreams, I don't wake up crying anymore. I wake up grateful. Grateful that even pain, when faced with honesty, can become a doorway to peace. Grateful that I learned how to walk away. And grateful that love, real love, starts not with someone else, but with finally choosing yourself.